Hi everyone, Kris from Stone Age Gamer here, and welcome to the Gratuitous Rainbow Spectrum. One of the best things about being in my line of work is all the opportunities I get to discover older games that I've never played before. The different projects I tend to get involved in frequently have me retreading information I'm already aware of, but sometimes I get the chance to run into a retro game that either I've never even heard of, or one that I've never had the pleasure of actually playing before. Last year was particularly good to me in that respect, so I thought it would be fun to take a look back at the new old stuff I discovered last year. Let's take a look. One unexpected pleasure I had last year was actually enjoying a Mario Party game, specifically the original one for Nintendo 64. Obviously I was familiar with Mario Party before, but the bulk of my knowledge about the game actually came from its music. There's a YouTube artist who goes by the name of Poop Poop Fart. Yes, really, who makes these wonderful covers of video game tunes. One of the songs he did several years ago was of Rainbow Castle from the original Mario Party. I'd never been all that fond of Mario Party, only having played it once at a friend's house ages ago, and I didn't really have a very good time. But after listening to a bunch of PPF stuff again last year, I decided I wanted to hear that song in its original context. So I busted out my copy of Mario Party and played a game with my son. We had a blast, and that led me to not only trying out a couple of other Mario Party games I owned from my years of working in video game retail, but also to purchasing the rather excellent Mario Party Superstars on Nintendo Switch the day it released, which has proven to be a really great multiplayer experience for my whole family. So here we have an entire game series that I had written off as junk for decades, and I finally understand it. It's not my favorite game ever, and I can't say I was overly fond of the GameCube sequels that I played, but it is a series I now have a newfound respect for, and that's never a bad thing. Here we have one of the only Metroid games I had never beaten before last year, Metroid Prime Hunters. Like Mario Party, I played this game when it first came out for a few minutes and decided that it really wasn't for me. But last year, my son and I played through the entirety of the Metroid series for a project I wanted to work on, which eventually became my complete US Metroid collection video here on the Stone Age Gamer YouTube channel. When we came to Hunters, I decided the best route was to download it on my Wii U so I could play it on the TV, making it easier for my son to watch me play. I'm not saying the game's a masterpiece or anything, but it finally kinda clicked with me, and it was a really good time. The single-player game has its issues, mostly in terms of controls, but all in all, it's a pretty fun little game that's especially impressive considering the hardware it was released on. I had written that game off as something I'd just never get around to doing for ages, and now I can finally say I've played through it to conclusion. That just leaves Metroid Prime Federation Force as the only Metroid game I've never beaten, but try as I might, I just can't bring myself to like that game. Oh well, you can't win them all. Then we have this wad of insanity. This here is Ninja Baseball Batman, which I discovered via our podcast. My co-host Dan was one of a handful of people who really went above and beyond for my 40th birthday last year, where they all made me an arcade cabinet with a PC running MAME built inside. Dan insisted that the two of us take a few minutes at my birthday party to stand there and play a few levels of this completely insane game that he loves called Ninja Baseball Batman. It's an awesome little beat-em-up that's nigh impossible to find in the real world, but thanks to Dan, I was able to play the thing on my very own arcade cabinet, and that's really cool. Over at geekade.com, I host another podcast called Waveback that's all about video game music. We were doing an episode celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Donkey Kong franchise when I went looking for some lesser-known David Wise DK tracks to include. In my search, I found that he had written a completely unique soundtrack for the Game Boy Advance version of Donkey Kong Country 3. Evelyn Fisher did the music for the Super NES original, which is a game I've never particularly cared for. I just think it's an ugly little thing, and the music never sat right with me either. Now, this GBA port isn't a much better game, but I did find it to be a bit more playable thanks to the new and, in my opinion, vastly improved soundtrack. I adore David Wise's music, and the stuff he came up with for Donkey Kong Country 3 on Game Boy Advance I feel just matches the stages they're attached to way better than the SNES original did. So no, I'm not a DKC3 convert or anything. I will never, ever like Kiddy Kong. But I did discover some absolutely kick-butt new music, and learned that the rest of the game had some wacky changes too, so much so that I devoted an entire blog post to the subject right here on StoneAgeGamer.com. I love that you can download the Mega Drive version of the Nintendo Switch Online Sega Genesis app. It was there that I discovered Puyo Puyo. Now, I've been a fan of Puyo Puyo for much longer than I was aware. I first played it as Kirby's Avalanche for Super NES, and a short while later as Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine for Sega Genesis at a friend's house. I loved Kirby's Avalanche, and I poured a ton of hours into the game. Several years later, I learned of its connection to Puyo Puyo, but every time I ran into a new Puyo release, I more or less ignored it because if I wanted to play Puyo, I'd just pop in Kirby's Avalanche. That is, until we got Puyo Puyo Tetris for Nintendo Switch. I love weird crossover games, and this one worked surprisingly well. In particular, I was overly fond of this one song in the game. Fast forward to late last year when I booted up Puyo Puyo for Mega Drive on my Nintendo Switch to see how similar it was to Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. And once I started actually playing the game, that song I loved from Puyo Puyo Tetris started playing. Turns out it's the theme of Puyo Puyo, and has been reprised in countless Puyo games over the years. The Mega Drive is apparently the first place where this song was used, and that 16-bit version is spectacular. The things you learn. Probably the coolest thing I got to play last year was a game called Makai Prince Dorobacchan for PC Engine. It's the prequel to one of my favorite Super NES games, The Twisted Tales of Spike McFang. I first learned about it when I was writing a blog for the site about secretive sequels a number of years ago. I recently revisited that post to turn it into a video on this very channel, and I wanted to get some footage for the game, so I started looking around online when suddenly it hit me. I have a Super SD System 3 now! So I found the files I needed, legally of course, and booted up the game for the first time, and it was great! It's no Spike McFang, but it's a pretty darn good time. While Makai Prince was probably the coolest game I tried out for the first time, this one was probably the most important. It's been a gaping hole in my video game history for way too long, and after literal decades of putting it off, I finally started a serious attempt to play through Secret of Mana for Super Nintendo. I had played through the opening segment dozens of times over the years with the intent of finishing the game off. I own the original cart, I bought it on Wii Virtual Console, but finally now, I'm in the middle of a playthrough in the Collection of Mana for the Nintendo Switch. It's super rough around the edges, sure, but I see why it's considered a classic, and I can't wait to actually finish the darn thing. So, yes, 2021 was a difficult year all around, but it was also a really good one in terms of video game discoveries for me. And I owe a lot of that to my chosen profession, which I am fortunate enough to have. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is thank you very much for reading and watching and listening to the stuff that I do. If nobody cared what I had to say, I wouldn't be able to make a living by saying it. So seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thank you to everyone who has supported my work for all these years. Also, a lesson I'm always happy to relearn, reiterate, and especially tell to my kids is never assume you know everything about everything, especially in terms of retro video games. Surprises are waiting around every turn, especially in places you never thought to look before. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you liked what you saw here today, please comment, like, subscribe, and let us know what you think. What old, new games did you play for the first time in 2021? I would love to know. Please leave a comment. Thanks again, everybody. On behalf of all of us here at Stone Age Gamer, keep playing games.